June 19, 1944. The Philippine Sea. Above the endless blue, Japan's last great carrier fleet prepares to strike while 200 feet under the waves, the sonar screen of USS Kavala pulses once, twice, 3 times, each echo a heartbeat of history. Through the periscope, Commander Hermann Kostler sees a faint silhouette, Shokaku, one of Japan's most decorated aircraft carriers. He whispers to his crew, "Fire 1." The torpedo lurches forward through dark water. Seconds stretch into eternities. Then the ocean erupts, a column of flame piercing the morning light, and within minutes, Shokaku, veteran of Pearl Harbor, slides beneath the waves. What no one in Tokyo yet realizes is that this single strike is part of something far larger, an invisible offensive already choking the Japanese empire from within. While battles rage above, beneath the surface a silent war is rewriting the outcome of the Pacific. When the Pacific War began in 1941, Japan's naval empire seemed unstoppable. Its fleet stretched from Burma to the Solomons. Its armies swept through Southeast Asia, but hidden inside that empire was a fatal flaw: fuel. Japan possessed almost no domestic oil. Its tanks, ships, and aircraft depended entirely on imported petroleum from the Dutch East Indies, today's Indonesia, every drop crossing thousands of miles of ocean, patrolled by American submarines. Early in the war, those submarines were underused and plagued by failure. Faulty torpedoes ran too deep or failed to detonate. Doctrine restricted them to warships only, and timid commanders often broke off attacks after a single shot. So, by 1942, U.S. submariners had sunk fewer than 10% of what they fired at. That changed under one man, Rear Admiral Charles A. Lockwood, who took command of Submarine Force Pacific Fleet in February 1943. A quiet strategist with an engineer's mind, Lockwood believed data could win wars as surely as bombs. He demanded tests that revealed nearly 60% of Mark 14 torpedoes failed due to magnetic triggers or depth errors. And when Washington dismissed the complaints, he famously wired, "Remove the duds from my torpedoes, or I'll remove the Bureau from the Navy." By summer 1943, the defects were fixed, and suddenly American submarines were lethal. Across the Pacific, fleet-type Gato and Balao-class boats, long, narrow steel sharks of 1,500 tons carrying 24 torpedoes, awaited their moment. Crews called themselves the Silent Service, their world of heat, sweat, and diesel stench sealed from daylight. Lockwood unleashed them. He tore up restrictions, declared any ship aiding Japan a target, rewarded aggression, and built a feedback loop of intelligence so each patrol improved the next. Radar-guided night attacks and wolfpack tactics borrowed from the Germans let boats coordinate through encrypted radio. A new kind of offensive took shape, one Japan could neither see nor stop. The results were mathematical. Before 1943, Japan moved roughly 10 million tons of merchant shipping each year. By the end of 1904, that figure dropped below 3 million. Submariners, just 2% of the Navy, were sinking more than half of all Japanese ships lost. Each torpedo was arithmetic. Every tanker destroyed meant planes grounded, destroyers idle, factories cold. In January 1943, Commander Dudley "Mush" Morton of USS Wahoo embodied this new ferocity, torpedoing convoys in the Yellow Sea and surfacing to finish survivors with deck guns, his brash reports inspiring a generation of skippers. Slade Cutter on Seahorse, Dick O'Kane on Tang, Sam Dealey on Harder, Hank Munson on Cobia. Each innovated night surface attacks, coordinated wolf packs, periscope depth ambushes, and Lockwood turned their experience into doctrine. Meanwhile, in Tokyo, admirals clung to faith in battleships and decisive engagements, ignoring the invisible drain. Convoy systems were weak, sonar training poor, escorts few. Even as tankers vanished, the Imperial Navy called the threat manageable. By late 1943, Japan had lost 1 million tons of shipping. By 1904, over 4 million. Submarines inflicted more tonnage loss than all Allied bombing combined. Commander Samuel Dealey's Harder proved how boldness itself became a weapon, sinking 5 destroyers in 2 weeks off Tawi-Tawi, diving beneath each explosion, the rabbit killing the hound. Lockwood hailed him as the Submariner's Submariner, and every route those destroyers abandoned became a corridor for U.S. supply lines, a tightening noose. Japan's oil lifeline from Borneo to Yokohama and Kobe was shattered. Tankers like Nisho Maru and Tonan Maru No. 3 erupted into fireballs until 80% of the fleet was gone. Carriers left port with fuel for one battle. Training flights ceased. Pilots practiced on wooden decks because they couldn't spare gasoline. Behind every grounded plane was a submarine crew somewhere in the dark Pacific. And so, returning to that morning of June 19, 1904, when Kavala fired on Shikaku, we see it was not luck, but logistics. That same day, dozens of Japanese aircraft fell from the sky not to bullets, but to empty fuel tanks. Historians call it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Behind it lay months of strangulation by Lockwood's boats. Admiral Suemu Toyota wrote, "We are fighting not the American fleet, but American production," never realizing the truer engine was beneath that production, data, mathematics, and unseen steel hulls. By the summer of 1904, Japan's empire still looked vast, but its arteries were dry. The merchant marine that once numbered 6,000 ships had dwindled below 1,500. The Imperial Navy was beginning to suffocate, and Lockwood was not yet finished. His next phase would be so effective that Japan would not even know it was happening until it was far too late. By the summer of 1904, Admiral Lockwood's submarine campaign had matured into a precision machine of destruction, but one new weapon remained hidden: information. The breaking of Japanese naval codes under the Ultra program in Pearl Harbor gave Lockwood's staff a ghostly map of the enemy's shipping. Radio intercepts pinpointed convoys days before they sailed. Decoded routing orders told where tankers would refuel. And weather reports, once innocent chatter, became clues to which lanes the Imperial Navy preferred. For the first time in naval history, submarines hunted not by luck, but by mathematics. Analysts at Pearl Harbor plotted targets on transparent overlays, layering intelligence, shipping schedules, and previous sightings into a three-dimensional picture of Japan's lifeline. Patrol orders went out with coordinates so precise that captains sometimes surfaced to find their prey exactly where predicted. The ocean, once infinite, was shrinking for Japan. One of the first to exploit this invisible intelligence was Commander Richard O'Kane aboard USS Tang. O'Kane had served under Mush Morton on Oahu and absorbed his mentor's aggression, but he refined it into discipline. The Tang left Pearl Harbor in January 1944 with new radar, recalibrated Mark 18 electric torpedoes, and orders to intercept convoys in the Formosa Strait. O'Kane believed in close-range attacks, often firing from less than 900 yards, then using radar to escape through darkness. His crew called it knife fighting underwater. On her 5th patrol, Tang destroyed 5 ships in one night. Japanese survivors swore they had been attacked by a flotilla. In reality, it was a single submarine guided by signals, intelligence, and ruthless precision. Lockwood's congratulatory message was brief. Outstanding. Keep sinking them. By the time Tang met her tragic end, ironically hit by her own circular-running torpedo in October 1904, O'Kane had sunk 33 enemy vessels, the highest confirmed total of any U.S. submarine commander. While O'Kane perfected aggression, others pushed stealth to its limit. Lieutenant Commander Joseph Enright, captain of USS Archerfish, spent months without a single kill. But on the night of November 28, 1904, patience met destiny. Radar picked up a massive contact south of Japan. It was the carrier Shinano, the largest warship ever built, a converted Yamato-class battleship displacing 72,000 tons. She was making her first voyage from Yokosuka to Kure under total secrecy. Ultra had hinted that a special vessel might sail that week, but Enright did not know what he had found. For 6 hours, Archerfish shadowed the giant, matching course and speed while remaining invisible on sonar. At 0317 hours, he fired 6 torpedoes. 4 struck home. Within 7 minutes, Shinano, 3 times the size of the Titanic, rolled over and sank. It was the largest ship ever destroyed by a submarine. Japan kept the loss secret for weeks. Few in Tokyo even knew the carrier had been completed. By late 1944, the Pacific became a hunting ground of ghosts. The wolf packs, coordinated through Lockwood's headquarters, gained names like Hydeman's Hellcats and Barney's Bullies. 3 boat teams attacked from multiple directions, each guided by ultra-intercepts and aircraft reconnaissance. Communication was brief, coded, and deadly efficient. Convoy HI-71 from Singapore to Manila was among their victims. In August 1904, 6 submarines ambushed it in the South China Sea, sinking 10 ships, including 2 oil tankers and a transport carrying 3,000 Japanese soldiers. Survivors clung to oil-slick debris as burning seas lit the night. The Imperial Navy lost not only men but faith. Rumors spread that American subs could read their mail, see through darkness, and even sense movement miles away. Fear became a weapon as potent as torpedoes. The results were measurable in gallons. In 1943, Japan imported roughly 1.75 million tons of crude oil each quarter. A year later, that figure collapsed to less than 300,000 tons. Refineries rationed kerosene to civilians. Military depots mixed pine root oil with gasoline to stretch supplies. The mighty battleship Yamato, symbol of Japanese pride, was ordered to anchor at Kure to save fuel. Training flights for new pilots were reduced to 10 hours total, barely enough for takeoff and landing. Mechanics drained aviation fuel from grounded bombers to keep a handful of Zero fighters operational. The Empire still held territory, but its heart, the flow of energy, had stopped. Inside Japan, the crisis was cloaked in propaganda. Newspapers spoke of temporary transport difficulties. Yet naval officers privately called it the anemia of the empire. Merchant captains were drafted from retirement. Fishing boats were requisitioned to carry supplies. Most never returned. The sea that once fed Japan had turned against it. Lockwood's staff calculated the impact in precise columns. In 1904 alone, 201 Japanese tankers totaling 2.3 million tons were sunk. At the same time, American shipyards launched new submarines faster than Japan could replace a single freighter. Each Gato-class boat cost about $6 million, and each sunk tanker cost Japan an irreplaceable month of fuel. The arithmetic of annihilation was clear. $1 of submarine costs destroyed $20 of enemy shipping. No weapon in history had achieved such economic efficiency. Even as victory loomed, the cost to U.S. crews was severe. 52 submarines, 1 out of every 5 deployed, never returned. Over 3,500 submariners died, many entombed in steel coffins resting still on the Pacific floor. Their sacrifice, invisible and unsung, underpinned every carrier strike and island landing. Without their silent war, no plane could have flown to Saipan, no tank could have rolled ashore at Okinawa. By early 1945, Japan's merchant marine was effectively extinct. Coastal barges replaced deep-sea convoys. Trains ran only when coal could be found. When Admiral Lockwood reviewed his latest reports that February, he noted a chilling milestone. For the first time, Japan had imported 0 barrels of oil in an entire month. The empire's defeat was now inevitable, but Tokyo did not yet understand that surrender had already begun, one sinking at a time. At the same moment, new technologies hinted at wars yet to come. Submarines fitted with improved radar and acoustic torpedoes could track targets by sound alone. Crews experimented with radar decoys and counter-sonar tactics that would define the Cold War a decade later. What began as desperation had evolved into a laboratory of underwater warfare. In April 1945, Admiral Lockwood toured Pearl Harbor's submarine base for what he knew might be the last time during the conflict. Rows of returning boats lined the piers, their conning towers painted with small Japanese flags. one for every ship destroyed. Mechanics worked in silence, washing salt and oil from steel hulls. For each flag, hundreds of enemy sailors had died, yet there was no celebration. "We've killed the Empire's arteries," Lockwood wrote in his diary, "but never forget, each drop of oil lost cost human lives on both sides." That moral weight would haunt the silent service long after the war ended. When Japan finally surrendered on August 15, 1945, few in the public understood how decisive the submarine campaign had been. The headlines spoke of atomic bombs and air raids, but in naval dispatches another figure told the hidden truth. U.S. submarines, just 1.6% of Navy personnel, had sunk 1,314 enemy ships, over 55% of all Japanese vessels destroyed. They had starved an empire without ever setting foot on its shores. After the war, captured Japanese records confirmed the magnitude of the collapse. In March 1945, the Imperial Navy possessed fuel for only one major operation. The Army had supplies for 3 weeks of fighting. Whole divisions were immobilized. A single submarine patrol could paralyze an island garrison. In interviews, surviving Japanese officers admitted they never fully grasped how precise the American campaign had become. "It was as if the sea itself turned hostile," one admiral said. "Our ships left port and vanished." The silence that followed was profound. In 1946, at a memorial service in Honolulu for fallen submariners, Lockwood addressed the families of those who never came home. His words were simple. They fought in darkness so others could live in light. Behind him, docked in the harbor, lay USS Bofin, its deck guns polished for tourists who would one day stroll her hull without hearing the hum of engines or the hiss of compressed air before a torpedo launch. Decades later, historians would reevaluate the Pacific War's economics and conclude that Admiral Lockwood's intelligence-driven campaign had been the most efficient destruction of an enemy's logistics in modern history. No weapon, not bombers, not battleships, not even the atomic bomb, had matched the silent mathematics of the submarine. And yet the legacy of that campaign was not merely victory, it was transformation. The submarine had evolved from hunter to deterrent, from steel shark to guardian. The lessons learned in the dark Pacific trenches, communication discipline, target prediction, precision over mass, became the foundation of modern naval warfare. By early 1945, the Imperial Navy tried to fight ghosts. The remaining destroyers and corvettes were fitted with crude sonar sets, their operators trained in a few hurried weeks. Escort groups sailed with depth charge racks stacked high, but fuel shortages limited every sortie. Each chase cost precious barrels of oil, and commanders learned to measure pursuit, not in miles but in gallons. Some captains ordered their engines idled mid-hunt, drifting in silence to listen for submarines they could no longer afford to chase. It was warfare reduced to exhaustion. Lockwood's submarines adapted faster than the enemy could learn. New QD, acoustic homing torpedoes chased propeller noise like guided hounds. Boats carried countersonar decoys, small canisters that hissed and bubbled to mimic a submarine's signature. The duel became eerily psychological, men fighting in blind water, judging life or death by the pitch of a ping. Inside the pressure hulls, air was thick with diesel fumes and sweat. Crewmen spoke in whispers, each sound magnified by steel walls. Depth charges burst above them, like sledgehammers striking the sea, compressing lungs and nerves. Many later said the worst moment was the silence after the last explosion, when no one knew if another would follow. Life aboard a submarine in 1945 was a cycle of fear and routine. 2 hours on watch, 4 hours off, meals of canned hash and instant coffee, humidity so dense that paper charts rotted. Yet, camaraderie held them together. Each patrol became a floating brotherhood where birthdays were marked by a single Hershey bar and victories by chalk marks on the bulkhead. When a torpedo hit home, men cheered not from hatred but relief. The sound meant survival. Between missions, they spent brief respites in Fremantle or Pearl Harbor, where sailors who had faced months of silence were suddenly overwhelmed by music, lights, and women who spoke too loudly. Then came the next patrol order, and the long descent back into the dim red glow of control rooms. Japan's counter-strategy grew desperate. They launched Q-ships, disguised merchant vessels with hidden guns meant to lure submarines to the surface. A few succeeded, most failed. Mines were sown across narrow straits, but U.S. intelligence soon mapped them from captured charts. Aircraft fitted with magnetic detectors prowled coasts, yet there was too little fuel to keep them aloft. Every defensive measure consumed the resource already vanishing, oil. By March 1945, American subs were prowling within sight of the Japanese home islands. They shelled coastal freighters, torpedoed ferries, even rescued downed aviators from near-shore waters. One patrol report recorded the surreal sight of farmers plowing rice fields as torpedoes detonated offshore. Japan's empire had shrunk to its doorstep, and still the silent service pressed in. When the battleship Yamato sailed on her one-way suicide mission toward Okinawa in April, she carried just enough fuel to reach the island, but not to return. Lockwood's men tracked her departure, but aircraft destroyed her before his subs could intercept. Even in defeat, the arithmetic of oil dictated fate. As the war neared its end, the submariner's world blurred between triumph and tragedy. On May 11, 1945, USS Lagarto attacked a convoy off Thailand and vanished under counterfire, lost with all 85 hands. A month later, U.S. Bonefish was trapped in the Sea of Japan and destroyed. For Lockwood, the reports became personal grief. Every lost call sign was a crew he knew by name. He ordered the words "still on patrol" entered beside missing boats in the daily roster, a tradition that endures in the U.S. Navy to this day. Then came August. When the atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, many submariners were still at sea. They heard the news as garbled radio fragments. New weapon, one bomb, entire city. Some doubted it was real. On August 15th, they received the coded message, "Cease firing, war over." A few crews wept, others sat in silence. For years they had fought an invisible enemy. Now the silence meant peace. When the boats returned to Pearl Harbor, the piers filled with families and flags. Reporters photographed sailors stepping ashore pale from months without sun. Admiral Lockwood met each crew personally, shaking every hand. In private, he wrote that victory felt quiet, almost embarrassed, because the men who made it possible were used to being unseen. Their campaign had starved an empire, but it had done so without spectacle. No parades, no famous battles, only statistics that told the story better than any trumpet. In Tokyo Bay during the formal surrender ceremony aboard USS Missouri, a handful of submariners stood among thousands of witnesses. They watched Japanese officers sign the documents that ended the war, understanding better than most that the ink on those pages had been mixed with oil that no longer existed. The empire's industrial heart had been hollowed out long before the mushroom clouds. After the ceremony, Lockwood flew to Guam to compile the final assessment of his command. The numbers were staggering. 314 enemy ships destroyed, totaling over 5 million tons. Of those, 64% were merchant vessels. Submarines had reduced Japan's oil imports to 9% of pre-war levels. The campaign's success had exceeded even his most optimistic projections. Yet in his final report, he included a line rarely quoted. "The cost of mastery of the sea is born in silence. May we never again require such silence." In the years that followed, many of the surviving submarines were decommissioned or scrapped. Others were refitted for the new atomic age, carrying missiles instead of torpedoes. Lockwood retired in 1947, but remained an advocate for his men, ensuring that the memory of their service did not fade behind the glow of nuclear headlines. Museums and memorials slowly appeared. The U.S. Bowfin at Pearl Harbor, the USS Pompanito in San Francisco, the USS Drum in Mobile. Visitors walked their narrow corridors, hearing recorded pings and diesel hums, unaware that these cramped spaces had once altered the fate of nations. The deeper legacy was strategic. Modern navies learned that logistics, not glory, determined victory. The submarine became the symbol of deterrence, silent, unseen, capable of ending wars by existing rather than firing. What Lockwood had proven was that destruction could be precise, almost surgical, achieved through intelligence and patience rather than sheer force. In that realization lay a paradox. The weapon born for stealth had taught the world the value of restraint. By the late 20th century, scholars revisited the Pacific War and began to call the submarine offensive the third atomic bomb, not for its flash, but for its cumulative devastation. Japan's industrial collapse had mirrored the effects of a slow nuclear winter, its factories starved of fuel long before the first bomb fell, and yet few school textbooks mentioned it. The silent service lived up to its name. Today, the Pacific still holds the wrecks of both hunter and hunted. Divers find the bones of ships that once fed an empire, and occasionally the rusted hulls of the submarines that ended it. In 2005, explorers located the wreck of USS Lagarto in the Gulf of Thailand, perfectly preserved in 230 feet of water. The hatches were sealed, the deck guns still aimed toward the surface. On the control room bulkhead, they found a clipboard frozen in silt, its pencil line mid-sentence. Time had stopped at the moment of impact, leaving a monument more eloquent than any memorial. The ocean remembers what nations forget. Each wreck is a chapter, each corroded propeller, a punctuation mark in the long story of the silent war. The lesson endures. Empires do not fall in explosions alone. They fade when their lifelines are cut quietly, methodically, by those who master patience in darkness. When the war's echoes finally faded, the men who had lived inside those steel tubes returned to a world that could not imagine what they had done. Cities glowed with neon again, gasoline flowed freely, and radios sang of victory, but the submariners carried the memory of pressure holes groaning in the dark. They had spent years beneath a horizon that never changed, and now daylight itself felt unreal. Many went back to school, to shipyards, to small towns that celebrated pilots and generals, yet barely mentioned the war fought underwater. They did not complain. Silence had become habit. Historians in the following decades pieced together the hidden campaign from declassified signals and patrol logs. What emerged was a portrait of disciplined intelligence. Codebreakers at Pearl Harbor translating intercepted weather reports. Analysts drawing invisible corridors across maps. Skippers risking their crews on those lines of probability. It was warfare by geometry and patience, a kind of industrial strangulation carried out with slide rules and sonar. Every successful intercept proved that knowledge could be deadlier than firepower. That insight would shape the Cold War and the information age to come. In Tokyo, post-war economists faced the wreckage. Shipyards lay silent, railways without fuel, and merchant sailors who survived the sinking spoke of the sea as cursed. They described oil slicks burning at night and the smell of gasoline on waves that once promised home. For them, defeat was not a single day in August, but 1,000 disappearances spread across years. The empire had starved long before it surrendered. The hunger had simply been hidden under propaganda and pride. Admiral Lockwood spent his retirement quietly on the California coast, writing essays about leadership and technology. He never claimed glory. When asked which weapon won the Pacific, he answered, "The one that made the enemy walk." He meant logistics, the mundane art of keeping machines alive. In his papers, he wrote that the submarine's greatest contribution was proving that precision could replace slaughter, that wars could be shortened when strategy attacked systems instead of cities. Few noticed the line at the time, but later generations of naval planners would quote it as prophecy. The submarines themselves lived second lives. Some were converted to training platforms, others sold for scrap. A few survived as museums, their control rooms preserved in quiet reverence. Visitors bend through narrow hatches, see bunks stacked 3 high, and realize that victory had been forged by men who slept beside torpedoes. Guides tell stories of heat so thick that paint blistered and of periscopes that froze mid-rotation. Children press buttons that once aimed weapons powerful enough to erase convoys, and for a moment the ghosts stir, the hum of diesel, the throb of the sea. Out at depth, wrecks still rest where they fell. Divers who find them describe an otherworldly calm. Brass gauges untouched, coffee cups fused to tables by rust, torpedo tubes yawning toward eternity. Crabs scuttle across names engraved in steel. In that silence lies the truest monument to the campaign. No flags, no speeches, only the equilibrium of ocean and metal. The Pacific keeps its own memory. Every empire builds on movement, of oil, grain, information, and every empire falls when that movement stops. The Silent Service understood this before anyone else. Their war was not fought for territory, but for tempo. They slowed an empire until it ceased to move, and in doing so, revealed the anatomy of modern conflict. That power is not what you hold, but what you can transport. 70 years later, naval cadets studying strategy trace diagrams of those patrol routes. They see that each success was born from feedback loops, intelligence guiding action, action producing intelligence, a concept now echoed in cyber warfare and economics. What Lockwood's crews pioneered in the darkness of the Pacific has become the blueprint for how nations fight without being seen. The silent war never really ended. It simply changed frequencies. And yet, beneath the theory, there remains something profoundly human. A submariner once wrote in his diary, "We fought the ocean more than the enemy. The ocean was fair." In that fairness lay their redemption. They had destroyed ships but preserved a principle, that courage can be methodical, that science and conscience can coexist even in war. As dawn breaks over Pearl Harbor today, the museum boat Bowfin rocks gently beside memorials to battleships lost in 1941. Tourists photograph her polished deck, unaware that this small vessel avenged the harbor, not with revenge, but with calculation. Beneath her hull, coral grows around the old mooring lines like veins knitting a wound. The water is clear, the sound distant, and if you listen long enough, you might hear the faint echo of a ping rolling through time, a reminder that the most decisive battles are often fought in silence. Because in the end, that was Lockwood's truth, the submariner's creed, and the lesson history nearly forgot. Empires can roar, armies can march, but victory belongs to those who master the quiet.